Week 16 of the fantasy football season, and it's crunch time for fantasy owners. So here's a few kickers I go out there and get off the wire this week. The first guy, Daniel Carlson of the Vegas Raiders. So the Raiders, after getting shut out in Week 14, it's a ball game versus the Minnesota Vikings. They came back with a huge vengeance and put up 63 points versus the Los Angeles Chargers. So Daniel Carlson, he had a nice ball game in that one with 9 fantasy points. And as a home kicker, he's been one of the best kickers in the league at home over the last few seasons. I know Week 16, tougher matchup at the Kansas City Chiefs, but this Chief team is a bend but don't break type of defense where I think field goal opportunities will be there for Daniel Carlson. So Carlson, he's got pretty good range, 45 to 52 yard range. He's pretty solid at. And this week in a matchup, I know Arrowhead this time of year, the weather's definitely nasty, rainy, or even just freezing out there. But I still think Daniel Carlson could go out there and have a decent game. And if you want to beat this Chief team, you're going to have to put points on the board any way you can find to. So this week, while he's available right now, is Daniel Carlson in 61% of fantasy leagues. I'll give him an ad this week. The next kicker, Matt Gay of the Indianapolis Colts. So Matt Gay, he's been a solid kicker for the most part this season. I know the hiccup in Week 14, missing an extra point and another field goal, but he's gone out there and he's put up fantasy points for the majority of the season. Pencil him in 7 or 8 weekly. So Week 12 versus Tampa, 8. Week 13 at Tennessee, 13. Week 14, negative in that game at Cincinnati, if extra points and negatives in your league. And Week 15 versus the Steelers, 10 fantasy points, even though he missed a field goal again in that one. So Week 16, a good matchup indoors at the Atlanta Falcons that give up the 4th most fantasy points to kickers on the season. So they're bend but don't break type of defense. And plus playing indoors, which is always a plus, is a great thing, obviously, where his home games have been indoors as well. Well, he's available is Gay, and he's been consistent for the most part this year. Available in 65% of fantasy leagues. The next kicker is Chase McLaughlin of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So McLaughlin, he's made this list a lot this season, and surprisingly still out there in 98% of fantasy leagues. I know not every kicker is going to be owned a lot, but I figured at least 10%, 15% of leagues would be owned as McLaughlin. So the last 3 out of 4 weeks, Week 12 at Indianapolis, 8. Week 14, Atlanta, 11. And Week 15 at Green Bay, 10 fantasy points. So Week 16, pretty decent matchup versus Jacksonville Jaguars. They're bend but don't break type of defense is this Jaguar team. We know you're going to have to put points on the board with this offense for the most part if you want to keep up with them. And Chase McLaughlin's got a big boot. We saw last season with Indianapolis, he had a solid season. And this year, he's having a solid season again for this Tampa Bay Buck team that all putting points on the board, believe it or not. Baker Mayfield's had a resurgent season, so right now, while he's out there in 98% of fantasy leagues, he's a kicker I look to get off the wire this week. Next kicker, Blake Grupp of the New Orleans Saints. So Blake Grupp, it's been an on and off type of rookie season for him, but he's getting opportunities over the last few weeks, and he's got a good boot, and he beat Will Lutz out for a reason before they traded him to the Broncos in training camp. So Week 16, a good matchup at the Rams. I give up the 5th most fantasy points to kickers on the season. And plus, it's an indoor game at Los Angeles, which is always a plus. So Grupp has a good leg. This offense of this New Orleans Saints team definitely stalls out a little bit. And he's available in 93% of fantasy leagues. And the 5th and final kicker I look to get off the wire this week, he is Ka'im Fairbairn of the Houston Texans. So Fairbairn, he was out for a little bit for 5 weeks with injury, but he returned in this ball game was Fairbairn at the Tennessee Titans, and he had 17 fantasy points. So Fairbairn's on an offense that stalls out a little bit. We know Case Keenum started the ball game, and they still found a way to win 19-16 was this Houston Texan team in overtime. If we can match up versus the Browns, that'll bend but don't break type of defense indoors, which is Houston is good. So we saw early in the season he had a couple decent games, was Ka'im Fairbairn, especially Week 3 to Week 5, double-digit fantasy games in all those games. And then the injury, he missed Week 10 to Week 15, but now he's back, Fairbairn, and he's in a good situation. So right now, while he's available in 99% of fantasy leagues, and he's got a field goal type of matchup versus the Browns, he's definitely in there this week. So that's a few kickers I look to hit off the wire here for Week 16 of the fantasy football season.